This is a Dhammanet presentation.
Monks tend to be a little bit cynical about this kind of thing. I remember one time when I was staying in this monastery, where I was just ordained for a year or two. I was staying in a monastery in northeast Thailand, and that particular monastery was just in the bush, in the boondocks. Can you say that? Anyway, in the rural areas, and monks I was staying, they were very kind of older monks I was with there. They're all about 70 or something like that, about 3 or 4 old monks, and most of them had ordained quite late in life, so they sort of reached the end of their life, and then at 60 or 70 they kind of ordained, and even then, one of them was like 72 or something like that, and his family kept on visiting him all the time and asking him to come back and help work in the rice fields. And you're like, really? Granddad, he's been doing that his whole life and he can't get a few years of peace at the end of it. Anyway, so I remember one time we're having a cup of tea in the evening, and they have these like little sweets or something like that you can have in the evening for monks, and these particular ones that we had these little kind of messages on them, like love is such and such, such and such, and love is such and such, such and such, and so I got one of these things and I pretended to read it, and I said, you're talking in Thai to the monks, and I'm reading it, and it says, "Kwam rakคือความทุกข์," which means love is suffering. And these old monks were like, yeah, that's right, love is suffering. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, that's exactly right. The wisdom of experience speaking there. So it seems to be what everybody's searching for, true love. There's an article, I think, in the Guardian this morning is arguing that the search for true love is what's destroying marriage. It's actually quite a reasonable argument. Basically, we expect too much from marriages. So in the old days it was more of a kind of practical arrangement, and these days you expect actually to meet your soulmate and to go on a spiritual journey and find your destinies together. And it's actually kind of rare, really, that something like that could happen. So the argument was that we fall so far short. This is why we get very disappointed in marriage. Anyway, I wouldn't know about that. But it certainly has become a very, I think, very powerful component of Western culture, the idea that this kind of ideal that we're finding our true love, finding the one, and it kind of justifies this kind of endless search. And you find actually similar ideals in if you look in the Buddhist tradition, but of course it's always always kind of connected with past lives, isn't it? In the Jataka traditions and so on, you get married to the same person again and again, even though it's not quite a Buddhist word to use the word soulmate, right? But it's certainly a similar kind of idea that you get married to the same person again and again, lifetime after lifetime. In Thai they call it ku barami, which means, barami is like the perfections that you develop in your lifetimes, and so ku means like a twin or a pair. So perfection, I don't know how to translate that actually. I translate as soulmate. I don't know if there's a Pali word for it. Is there a word do you have a word in Sinhala to mean that? Somebody you get married lifetime after lifetime? No? Maybe it's just Thai culture then. That's usually the words that the monks use when they disrobe and they go and get married and say, "Oh, this is my ku barami." And so there's something, there's something in that idea that there's a sense of recognition, right? When you find true love, you recognize each other, you see each other, and somehow you complete each other. So these days we try to find that essence of completing each other right through like dating websites and things like that. So you can, you put in your different qualities and things like that, and then they crunch all these algorithms and they come up with who's going to be your ideal partner. Yeah? So maybe you can find your soulmate that way. Yeah? Maybe not. In the Buddhist text, it's kind of done the old-fashioned way. You know how they say you find your soulmate in Buddhism? There's a story which you find in a number of the Jatakas and so on about how to do that. It's in the life story of Mahakassapa and also quite a few others. But it goes something like this: that when this case is told from the son's point of view, that his parents want him to get married, and he really just wants to avoid it and doesn't want to get married. So he says, "Okay, I'll only marry a woman who looks like this," and then they make a golden statue. Okay, so they make the perfect woman out of a golden statue. And then they say, okay, we have to go, and unless you can find a woman who looks exactly like that, then I'm not going to marry her. So they take this golden statue around all the country, and of course they can't find any woman who's going to live up to the ideal. Until finally they get to one place, and usually it goes something like this. They kind of put this statue in the market, and the statue is so beautiful and radiant, and it's out of burnished gold, and it's got pearls for eyes and all of these kinds of things. And then this a woman walks up to the statue and says, "Come back home. It's time for you to come back." Right? And then they hit it. This old woman hits the statue with a stick, and then she realizes, oh, it's just a statue. It's not an actual woman. Turns out, of course, that the statue looks just like the princess in the local palace, and the old woman is the old nurse or the old stepmother or something like that who's been taking them. And the princess has disappeared or something, so she mistakes the statue. So, of course, then they get married. But in many of the versions of this particular one, especially if I'm thinking of the story of Mahakassapa and Bhaddakapilani, it's one of the most kind of touching, beautiful kind of love stories in the Buddhist tradition, certainly in the Pali tradition, because when they got married, they're both like, actually, I don't really want to get married. You're like the perfect partner for me. I couldn't imagine anybody better. Yeah, but still, I don't really want to do it. we really should. So they get married, but they live a very chaste life and they live a very restrained life. In the story of Mahakassapa and Bhaddakapilani, when in their bridal bed, they would lay a flower in between them in the bridal bed, right, which they wouldn't cross over. It's a very kind of idealized thing, but the nice thing about that story is how mutual everything is. They actually write letters to each other, saying, explaining their feelings very openly and very straightforwardly, and everything's agreed communally. It's very gentle and very respectful, and so everything they do through their life, then they're equal partners in everything, and then. When it's time for them to give up everything, I think after their parents died, they decided they could now go forth. So they gave all their things away. They gave all their possessions to their servants, and then they went forth together. And they went over. In that case, Kassapa and Bhaddakapilani became monk and nun, and ended up becoming arahants. So that's it's a very idealized story of a kind of perfect true love from a Buddhist point of view. But one of the things it does illustrate, obviously, is this idea of true love or finding a spiritual partner is not the end of the road, right? It's something that happens, and actually, it's not seen as being something which is bad or anything like that. It's being something which has a role to play or supports people in their spiritual practice to a certain degree, right? But where at a certain point, once you've done that, actually you go past it, right? And so you evolve past it. And that's where they were. They were very highly evolved beings, and they actually were over that whole thing. Right? Of course, if you go back into their Jataka stories and back in previous lives, and that wasn't like that, but that's where they got to now. So, and that story is actually quite an interesting one. I wrote about this in White Bones, Red Rot, Black Snakes, because in Mahakassapa he has this kind of reputation for being a bit kind of, well, a bit misogynist, some people would say, or a bit hard on the nuns. Actually, there's not very much evidence for that. There's really just one or two sayings or something like that. Whether that was the case or not, I don't know. But what's interesting to me was that in the tradition, that somewhat harshness of Mahakassapa's character was almost like it was felt that it was needed, this balance of this developing this relationship with Bhante Kapilani as a counterweight. And in the some of the traditions, that there's some nice stories about that even after they were ordained. And in one of the Tibetan texts, I'm just trying to remember what the source of the story is now. I can't remember quite what the source was, but it tells a story about how when Bhante Kapilani had become a nun, and she would go into town, and when she was walking for alms through the town, she would get catcalls, right? She'd get harassed. Hey, sexy, show us your legs, right? Right? This is not a new invention, right? Sexual harassment is not a... So this is possibly the world's oldest record of sexual harassment, right? Possibly. I'm not sure. There might be some older, but it's certainly a very old record of it. And what was interesting was the response to it. When Mahakassapa heard about that, he immediately said to her, look, you shouldn't have to put up with that. That's completely inappropriate. You stay here in the monastery. I'll go out and get food for you and bring it back so you don't have to endure that. Yeah? That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah? That's pretty amazing. That he would, immediately, without any hesitation, take that responsibility to do what he could to help. Yeah? And so, if you hear, people criticizing Mahakassapa for being sexist or something like that, then you should know, according to the Buddhist tradition, he was the first one to adopt a anti-sexual harassment policy in the world, okay? Recognition of sexual harassment in the workplace, because going for alms round, that's the workplace for Buddhist monks and nuns, right? And so to actually do something about it. Yeah? It's very interesting, because it would have been easy for him to say, just let go. Yeah, well, what can you expect? These things happen. Tough it out, right? But he didn't. He said, no, that's not appropriate. And he didn't just condemn it or criticize it, but he actually went that extra mile to go and collect the alms food. I mean, that could have been quite a lot of work, right? I mean, that's, it's not, depending on where you are and what the situation is, it can be many hours of walking through the village and so on to collect the alms food. So this idea of, I guess, a soulmate or something like that, I think that does have a part to play in Buddhism, but it's not felt to be an end goal or anything like that. It's felt to be something which can be useful or can be helpful along the way. So I do think there's something to this idea of us having these too much expectations of each other. It's one of the great things, even with living within the monastery, with the monks, are probably the number one thing to create harmony in the monastic community is to lower expectations. Number one. Yeah. You go in there thinking, oh, these monks are all going to be enlightened, and then you realize, no, they're not all enlightened. And then you think, well, they're all going to be great meditators, and then you realize, oh, no, they're not all great meditators. Oh, they're all going to be very good practitioners. Well, no, they're not all good practitioners. Now, some of them maybe are, but some of them aren't. And people are diverse and people are different. Yeah? So acceptance, communications, all of those things is very important. One of the best stories that I have from, or that I know about this idea of true love and what it means and so on, is actually not from the Buddhist tradition, although it bears something in common with stories from the Buddhist tradition, but it's from the legends of King Arthur. And I'm just trying to remember, it's been a while since I've read that story, so I'm just trying to remember the details of it now. And I think it was Sir Lancelot. And I'm just trying to recollect the details. Okay, so I think pretty sure it was Sir Lancelot. King Arthur was going through the woods one day and met the Black Knight. Okay, and so the Black Knight was going. They had a duel or something like that, and the Black Knight was going to chop King Arthur's head off and said, "Okay, well, I'll spare your life if you can answer me one question. Okay, and you need to come back here in 1 year from today with the answer to the question, and if you don't, then I'll take your life." And King Arthur said, "Well, what's the question?" And the Black Knight says, "What does a woman want?" And King Arthur said, No, please, anything but that. Ask me where the sun and the stars come from. Ask me how the universe began." The Black Knight said, "Only one question can you ask?" So he says, "All right." So he goes back to the round table and tells all these knights what happened, and they say, "Okay, we'll undertake a research project." Okay, we can't Google it, they said, because Google hasn't been invented yet. So we can't look it up on Wikipedia because that hasn't been invented yet. So we will travel out across the land and we will ask everybody that we see, what does a woman want? And we will record all of the answers in a great book. And then somebody will know the answer. So that's what they did. They went out and they travelled all across the land, seeking out people who could answer the question. Lots of people came up with lots of different answers. What a woman wants is beauty. What a woman wants is to be loved. What a woman wants is to be understood. What a woman wants is jewellery. What a woman wants is a good man. So they got all of these answers to these questions and they wrote them down in the big book. But they were unsatisfied. They knew somehow that they hadn't got the right answer yet. Until one day, King Arthur was going along the road and he met this old hag riding on a horse. And when I say old hag, she was the ugliest creature that you've ever seen. She had warts on her face the size of your fist. She had only 2 teeth in her mouth, both of them going in opposite directions. Yellow, poking out at odd angles. I could go on some time telling about how ugly she was, but anyway. And so she said to King Arthur, "I know what your quest is, and I can tell you the answer that you're looking for." She said, "I know that you've got many answers in your book, but none of them are the right answer. And if you don't find the right answer," this was getting quite late in the day now, it was getting close to the year, "if you don't get the right answer, then the Black Knight will have your head." He says, "Okay, well, tell me the right answer." And she says, "Well, only if I can make a deal with you." He says, "Okay, whatever it is." And she says, "Only if I can have the hand of Sir Lancelot in marriage." Sir Lancelot was the fairest and the gentlest of all the knights. And Arthur's like, "Well, I'm going to have to consult with Lancelot on that one." She says, "Make it quick." Anyway, so he goes and sees Sir Lancelot and tells him, says, "Look, this woman, she says she can give me the answer and she wants to marry you." And Lancelot says, "Fine." And Arthur says, "Look, Lance," he says, she's not the prettiest woman in the world, you know. And he says, it doesn't matter, looks don't matter to me. And Arthur says, no, really. we're not talking plain or homely here. This is and anyway, Lancelot, being the noblest of all of the knights, agreed to marry. So, if of course she gave the right answer, right? And so she gave the answer. They went back and they said, "What is it that a woman wants?" And her answer, sovereignty. Sovereignty. So, King Arthur writes that down in his list of answers and goes to meet the Black Knight. And of course, he wants to. He wants to get to that answer last, right? Because he wants, if any of the other answers are right, then he doesn't have to marry off poor Lancelot. Anyway, so he reads through the whole book, all of the other answers, and they're all wrong. And the Black Knight says, "Now I have your head." And he says, "Hang on, one more answer." And he says, "The answer is, what a woman wants is sovereignty." And the Black Knight's like, "Drats! Foiled again." Now, being mythology, actually, there's a backstory to this, which is somewhat complicated. But it turns out that the old hag was related to the Black Knight, and there's this whole thing going on there. But that's not really relevant for the story, anyway. So then they arrange the marriage, right? So they get all of they get to the castle, everybody's invited, so Lancelot's there, they've got all the decorations, music is playing, there's dancing and festivities, but everyone's finding it a little bit difficult to get into the spirit of it too much, and they're sitting there at the dinner table, and they've got like these kind of boars and things on the table, and she's like rips off the leg of the boar and is like devouring the whole leg. And all the palace ladies are kind of looking at her and thinking, "Oh my goodness." Anyway, so after all the festivities, everything is done, then comes the fateful time, and the bride and groom have to repair to their bedroom for the evening. Lancelot has a feeling of dread in his heart. So they get up into the bedroom, and Lancelot's saying, "Okay, do your duty, be a man." 3 times he tried to kiss her and couldn't. Anyway, so he kisses her, and when he kisses her, she turned into the most beautiful woman. Fairest princess he could ever see. And she said, "Oh, thank goodness you've released me from my spell." Right? He's like, what's going on? How is the spell? And he said, "Well, look, this is how it works, okay? Now, I can either be beautiful by day and ugly by night, yeah? Or ugly by day and beautiful by night. Yeah? And you have to make the choice, right? Which do you want? Is it better to have, she should be beautiful when they're with people and, in society and things, or is it better when they're by themselves? Is that when he wants her to be beautiful? So he has to make the choice, and he can't make the choice. He says, "This is not for me to make the choice. It's up to you. You make the choice." Yeah? And when he said that, he said, now, she said, "My spell's now broken forever. Yeah? Now I'll be beautiful both day and night." Yeah? Because he gave her sovereignty. Yeah, gave her the sovereignty. So to me, that's a very nice story because it has it's interesting to find a kind of feminist idea in the King Arthur's Knights of King Arthur's Tale. But the reason why my interest was first drawn to that particular story was because in the suttas, the Buddha has a list. He has a list of like different kinds of people, and then what do they want, right? What's their aspiration, right? So it says like what does a Brahmin want, right? And what does a Khattiya want, and all these different kinds of people. And when it comes to saying what does a woman want, it says what a woman wants is sovereignty. Interesting, isn't it? It's exactly the same idea. Yeah? And that's a very short sutta, and it doesn't actually explain any more what that means. But I think that's basically what it means, is that a woman has a right to choose, has a right to decide. There's not just going to be bossed around and told what to do all the time. So this also, I think, is one of the great secrets to love and to success and so on, is that kind of mutual respect. Yeah? And of course, in those days, it would have been something which was not taken for granted at all, right? I mean, obviously it wasn't taken for granted, otherwise you wouldn't have to mention it. Yeah? But that ability for the partners in the relationship to have that sense of mutual respect. In another one of the Buddhist suttas which talks about family relations, is a very famous one, is the Sigalovada Sutta. And many people will be familiar with that. And that has a description of the duties that a husband owes to the wife and the wife owes to the husband, as well as to others in the family, in the circle and so on. And it's actually quite nice. I remember we had that list of the things that the duties between the wife and the husband. And I remember once when I was at Santi and I was visited, there was a group of Western feminists there, and we were having a chat about gender issues and things like that. And so I showed them this particular passage, and I said, "Can you find anything wrong with it? Give me a feminist critique of this particular passage." And they couldn't find anything wrong with it. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Yeah. I can't remember there's like 5 or 6 things that a wife should do for the husband and the husband should do for the wife. Can you remember what they are? Sorry? I think that's one thing. The husband should give gifts of jewellery and so on to the wife. Yeah. I think the wife should look after all the household affairs with care and responsibility. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. The wife shouldn't spend all the husband's money. Not too much eBaying. I'm not sure if that was in exactly that place, but I think there was something about being generous and kind for all, like the servants and the workers. Yeah, so making sure they all have good wages and they're looked after. Yeah, so. Yeah, it's very nice actually, and it is very remarkable that you see those things, and 2,500 years old, and what it says is kind and respectful and sensible, and still provides a very good guide, and still would be something actually which is very aspirational for most people, to have that degree of respect and so on. So I think this is something in love and relationships, is that I think there are certain minimum requirements that we can do. We can always have that sense of respect. We can always have that sense of sharing, appreciation, giving people sovereignty, and giving people a say, and listening, and so on. Those are things that I think we can do. Whether we can be soulmates with somebody else, that's a bit more random, isn't it? That's up to the kind of the universe. Is it going to deliver your soulmate to you? Maybe, maybe not. But again, this is something that we find even in the monasteries. If you live in a monastic community, one of the curious things about a monastic community is that you're together with a bunch of people who, you share a lot in common, right? Your lifestyle and your values and your aspirations and things like that are all common, but you don't necessarily like each other, right? That's kind of an optional extra, and you're not living in the monastery because you like the other guy, right? It's not like it's not like you've kind of moved there because I mean, sometimes you do, right? Sometimes it might be somebody who you get along with really well and you can come and share a place with, which is terrific. But often it's not like that. There's all kinds of reasons why you might end up in one particular monastery, right? Maybe that's the only one you can get your visa for, or maybe you just like the teacher, or maybe it's whatever. And so you end up there with a bunch of people who, you may or may not have things very much in common with. Huh? but you make a life there, and there is sometimes that you can sometimes you really do make a really strong connection with people, and you can really sort of connect on a Dhamma level, and that's a fantastic thing to be able to do that. But often it isn't, and that's okay too. And I think that's something that we really need to appreciate. Just the idea of lowering your expectations, not it's okay. Not expecting too much, not wanting too much out of other people. And sometimes in relationships, one of the thing which is most damaging, if you think back to that story of Mahakassapa and Bhaddakapilani, they were two people who were quite independent. They're actually quite happy. And they were also happy to be in a relationship. They were happy before they went in the relationship, then they were happy in the relationship, and then they were happy afterwards as well. Yeah? Rather than thinking, I need to have this relationship in order to complete myself. Right? That's when things start to get a bit needy and a bit problematic. Right? Yeah. In English, you have this kind of idiom. I love you, I need you. Yeah. It's a bit creepy, isn't it? Right? I need you. What's going to happen if you go away? If you really like I say, if you love someone, set them free. There's a very big difference between loving somebody and needing them. Yeah? If you really love somebody, whether they're there or not, you still love them. Yeah? And you see this not just in emotional relationships, but also in like parent-children relationships. Yeah. And when children are growing up, of course, they need their parents. That's obvious. That's appropriate at that time. Children grow up, and then they don't need their parents anymore. And then you find out sometimes how much the parents need the children. The children have grown up. The parents are still working on it. Yeah. So again, there's something a bit wrong there. Love should be independent. Yeah? Otherwise, it's not free. Otherwise, it's bound down, and otherwise it brings to suffering. And this is the big difference between metta, as loving kindness, and these kinds of romantic or kind of a love that is bound up with attachments. It's the big difference. Yeah? When there's attachments there, then when there's separation, there'll be suffering. Yeah? But when there's metta, there's no suffering. Yeah? If someone leaves, it's okay. If someone dies, it's okay. You still maybe feel sad for them, or it's not that you don't have any feelings about that, but you don't. It's not all about you. It's not all about how you make me feel. I remember the talk Uncle Brahm gave a few years ago. I don't know if you were there, but one of the talks he gave at the Rosalie Community Centre, and he said that I couldn't believe he was saying this actually, but he said that if your partner's having an affair, then you should feel really happy for them. You should tell them, go away, have good sex, have fun. If you really love them, you want them to be happy. If that's what makes them happy, then you should. So that's a level of liberation that most people are still working on. But the basic idea is there, yeah? And love shouldn't be about attachment, it shouldn't be about needing. There's a big difference between needing and loving. And loving is all about their happiness. Needing is all about your own happiness. Yeah? Metta is all, I don't love you because you make me happy. Yeah? Metta is all about, I want you to be happy. Yeah. So this is why the idea of love or of metta is something which, from a Buddhist point of view, it evolves. It's not just one kind of thing, it's not one final kind of thing. if there's a final state of metta, then it's that universal loving kindness. May all beings be happy. And that's something to move towards. But you don't move towards it by somehow just imagining that you're there. And I think this is also something that's important to remember. And a little bit before the talk, when we were talking about meditation before, I said that in Buddhism, one of the most important things about Buddhism is how grounded it is. And so those higher forms of metta and loving kindness are grounded in more basic forms of metta and loving kindness. And if you think that you can have boundless loving kindness for all sentient beings, right? But you can't have loving kindness for yourself, you can't have that kind of free or giving love for your children or parents or your partner, if those forms of relationships and with basic relationships in your life, if they're still conditioned by jealousy, by neediness, by attachment, by holding on, then there's no way that you can develop the more powerful spiritual forms of loving kindness. You have to start with where you're at. Otherwise the metta, the ideal of metta, becomes like another kind of denial. You can forget about, I have lots of metta for all sentient beings, and you forget about all of the actual problems that you have with your neighbour and your wife and your boyfriend. So we see if we can sort those things out first. All sentient beings, they've waited around for a while, they can wait for a little while longer. And just remember that ideal of Mahakassapa and Bhaddakapilani. There's a long time together. They're happy to be together, they're happy to be apart. And that's how they support each other in their spiritual practice. Okay, so that's all I've got to say on true love.